Welcome back to Faye's Place, a podcast where dreamers have the liberty to dream. I'm your host, Phaedra, and I am so excited that we have this time to dream together. Happy Black Music Appreciation Month, and it's also Mentor Monday. So it's apropos that we talk about Motown. Y'all already know how I feel about it. Not only because it was groovy, not only because it changed the trajectory of how we listen to music worldwide, but because Motown was a place where dreams came true. So exciting news, when Gordy really put together Motown, he was 29 years old, people. And he was inspired by working on the assembly line for a car plant back in Detroit. He loved the idea how there was a frame, and by the time it came out of the conveyor belt, it was a full car. And he said, you know what? Let's do this, but with entertainment. And so he broke down his whole operation into 3 functions: the create phase, the make phase, and sell phase. He later switched it to the create, sell, and collect phase. The create phase was dedicated to the writing, the producing, and the recording of songs. And the make phase was dedicated to the manufacturing and the pressing of the records. And of course, that collect phase was collecting the money. Now, let me just tell you something. When I found out that he had different phases of his company, I was like, me too, Gordy, me too. Hello, Phase Place. Different phases of entertainment. That's what we do here. I'm learning so much from reading his autobiography called To Be Loved. So I'm just going to share some things that I believe all of us as creatives can glean from and apply it to our own creative works. Sometimes when I hear the word sensitive, I feel like people use it to be derogatory to someone. However, I love the word. I've grown to accept the word because creatives have to be sensitive. That's literally what separates us from other people. So it was a joy to learn that Gordy really is a sensitive type of person. So a few months after his 15th birthday, his sister Esther gave him this poem that she said he needed to read. Now, he wasn't really fond of reading, but it was called If. And this was the first time that he realized that emotional strength is just as important as physical strength. So not only did he love boxing, but he also loved writing songs. And so here you see how the two mesh together. Ultimately, his sensitivity became his superpower because you have to be sensitive to write songs, and songs led him to Motown. What I love about this autobiography is that there was no linear path towards his dream. And that's something that creatives always have to keep in mind because society will make you feel like you have to go from point A to point B and it's a straight line. But that's not always the case. Your point A to point B may be filled with zigzags. In fact, it will be filled with zigzags, hurdles, circles, U's, U-turns, all of the above. It's just important that you stay consistent in your dream. And he also kept reiterating the fact that a lot of his ideas was not materialized beforehand. So he had to come up with these methods to bring them to fruition. I know that was frustrating. Y'all know it's frustrating when there's something in your mind and you're like, okay, I see it so clearly, but nobody else is understanding you. But you owe it to yourself to stay consistent. And on top of that, he had no formal business training. This man is a genius. So let's get into the creativity behind Motown, Hitsville, USA. He credits its success to the atmosphere. He created an atmosphere where everybody was encouraged to be truthful, to be creative, and to make mistakes. And he was big on feedback. He said that if people would come up to him and say, oh, this was great, he's like, well, what went wrong and how can I make it better? I think this is important for creatives to remember because we are sensitive, but we need to set people in place that we trust that's going to give us constructive criticism because the whole goal is to make sure that we're producing something that is great. He allowed creative people and non-creative people in Motown to give feedback for songs. And when you think about it, this makes so much sense, because how many times have you put something out in the world and you have critics and they've never done anything creatively, but they have so much to say, right? So, of course, we need the opinions of the creative people and the non-creative people, because different people hear things differently. And like an assembly line, Motown had everything in-house. Producers, writers, choreographers, chaperones, you name it, they had it. Which reminds us that art is a collaborative industry. You can't do it alone. Motown gave us the world's biggest stars. And we're going to talk about Diana Ross, because I love her. She kept the main thing. She had a dream. She had a goal. Her and her friends were at Motown every day. Berry Gordy was like, finish your education. They were like, okay, cool. They were still at Motown every day. So by the time they graduated, they already had built relationships and they were familiar in the environment in which they were planning to work. And if you ask me, that's smart. And they learned a lesson in perseverance, because once they were signed, they were not overnight stars. It took them years before they got a hit. They had to find their voice. They had to rename themselves. They had to build their brand. And we have to remember as creatives that it's going to take time, and it's okay to reinvent ourselves and try new things until we find what works for us. Now, I did underline 2 things that I learned concerning negotiations from Berry Gordy. Number 1, he said, is never out-negotiate yourself, meaning that a part of something is better than all of nothing. He talked about a time when he was trying to negotiate this deal and the other party wanted a discount. So he was like, and I'm not going to give you all the details. But he realized, he was like, listen, I'd rather take that discount than lose out on the whole entire thing. And I thought that was smart. So I was like, noted. And the second lesson was in the 4 Ds. Be direct, deliberate, decisive, and don't be dumb. The incident that happened was someone wanted one of his artists to show up someplace. And instead of Berry Gordy being direct with his answer, he kind of danced around it. Ultimately, the person was able to find a loophole. Everything is good now, but it was just a good reminder to him, and it's a good reminder to us that when it's dealing with our gifts, we want to be a good steward, and part of being a good steward is being direct. I also found it interesting that even at the beginning phases of Motown, Berry Gordy saw how Motown could reach Broadway and even the big screen. I'm sure he wanted that immediately, but it took some time for him to leverage and to build a brand that was conducive for both of those opportunities. When we look at this work that Berry Gordy has done today, we've seen that he achieved the goal of being on Broadway, and he's done quite a few films. So again, here's another lesson of just building your craft and building relationships. So this way your dreams can evolve and you can evolve with them. One of the reasons why I love autobiographies is because you can find yourself in other people's stories, and then you can learn lessons without you necessarily having to go through that same experience. Berry Gordy had to remind himself just to appreciate the success that he has and how success is relative, and you have to make sure that you have a healthy mindset of what success actually looks like. For example, Lady Sings the Blues was nominated for 5 Academy Awards. 5. And although they did not win, and of course they were disappointed at the time, he had to realize that he was literally nominated for Hollywood's top honor 5 times for his first film. That's why it's important not to compare yourself to other people, and it's important to put everything into perspective. Even though you could get so zoned in, like, oh my goodness, I had this win behind this win behind this win, you have to always make sure that you are putting forth your best effort, and that's the only thing that you can be responsible for. I'm happy to see how he takes accountability for how he responded in certain situations and maybe how he treated other people. And I think this is a lesson for all of us to say, how can we balance making sure that we're protecting our gift, holding ourselves up to high standards, making sure that people hold us to high standards without losing our integrity, and how we can always put our best foot forward. It is a dance and we have to learn the choreography. There's no way to get around it, but it is doable. And like I said earlier, that's the best part about listening to interviews. Best part about autobiographies and documentaries is that we can incorporate other people's lessons into our life so we don't have to make the same mistakes. That our contribution to this industry is not only our creative works, but how we treat other people. One thing's for sure, Berry Gordy is a dreamer that has the liberty to dream, and he encourages people around him to dream big. Now, that's the kind of thing I look for in a mentor. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of Mentor Monday, looking at the life and the work and the career and the dreams of the Berry Gordy. If you enjoyed this episode and what we're doing here on Faye's Place, please make sure to give us a great rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Join us next Monday with another episode with you in mind. I love you all for listening. Hi friends, it's Phaedra and you are listening to Faye's Place. Join us each week as we talk to industry insiders about their journey and what it takes to turn dreams into a reality. Whether you aspire to be in the entertainment field or just inspired by the hustle, count this as your backstage pass. Join us every Monday for a brand new episode. And also follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook at Faye's Place.